Well, hello and welcome to this week's edition of Big Country Politics. I am Manny Diaz. Today we are joined by our new Public Information Officer of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Mr. Sergeant Marc Couch. Sergeant Couch, welcome to Abilene and the Big Country.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, this is, you have spent a lot of years in law enforcement, 32 years in law enforcement, but this is kind of your first tour here in Abilene. Tell us a little bit about yourself so far.
So I've started in law enforcement in Big Spring, Texas, so I'm not unfamiliar with the area. Actually, I went to Hardin-Simmons University for a semester here back in 1986 after I graduated from high school. So I'm kind of familiar with the area, have family who's lived around the Abilene area. So we're very excited about being here at this location. But I've spent about 15 years in law enforcement around the Big Spring area with the Big Spring Police Department and also with the Howard County Sheriff's Office. I worked 7 years with the Big Spring Independent School District as a school district police officer, and then 15 years with the Texas Department of Public Safety as highway patrol officer, and also with the aircraft division and doing commercial vehicle inspection and different things. So I have a vast experience doing lots of different stuff.
A tenured kind of guy. 32 years in law enforcement, 15 years in the DPS. In fact, you're coming to us from the El Paso sector. You've spent the last 3 years there. Tell us, I mean, imagine Abilene, the Big Country, maybe just a tad bit different.
A little bit different. See a little more water, a little more trees out here. So we're excited about being in that area. The Big Country is just a beautiful place to live. El Paso is beautiful in its own way, but certainly the parts of Texas and what's going on are different.
Mm-hmm. Tell us how much different is the El Paso border from these other border towns, and certainly the dilemmas, the issues that you've encountered, during your time in El Paso.
Yeah. So when we look at the border, we're looking at McAllen, Del Rio, those areas. They all have their own special circumstances and situation because the Rio Grande runs, kind of snakes up and down through the McAllen area, and they haven't put up a complete border wall. Down there, I spent some time in the aircraft division with the department. We flew down there several places, and you would see a border fence that would be up, and it would be a quarter-mile long, and then both ends wide open. So you basically just walk around it to get into or breach the country at that way. So the problems are different down there because it's wide open, and a lot of the border crossings enter into a city where there's structure and infrastructure and roadways where people can get to them and then transport people out quickly. It's different. When you get down the Del Rio sector all the way to the Big Bend sector, now you're looking at vast desert areas. You cross the border down there and you don't have enough food or water, you're going to die in about 3 days.
So is that potentially why we see more border crossings down in the Del Rio area?
It is.
Versus what we see in El Paso?
It is. And so if you're talking about El Paso, border fence was put up there all the way from the state line of New Mexico all the way through about Fort Hancock or so. This first city that you see, it has a complete border fence that has ports of entry that you can legally cross, that you're screened. All those things are happening. So you don't see the wholesale movement of people, hundreds of people trying to just cross a river and then walk into the country through those means. El Paso has had a great border relationship with Mexico for years. Being from there, a lot of people live in Mexico and work in El Paso, and a lot of people live in El Paso and they work in Mexico. And so there's literally hundreds of people who cross every day in that sector, and legally, and everything is good to go, and the border area is very safe and secure. El Paso has been in the top 5 of safest cities in the nation for years.
Wow.
And they live right next to Juarez, which is the most dangerous and deadliest place on earth. And so El Paso does a fantastic job. It's a wonderful city. It's a beautiful place to live, and just pretty. And the people there are great.
There's a lot of talk, from on the political spectrum, left and right, what to do with the border wall in the state of Texas, and certainly throughout the border states of America. Is there a benefit to having a wall? I mean, let's hear it straight from you. I mean, you see it. You've seen it first and forehand.
So when you see a border wall, I mean, it gives you the ability, and just like your home. You have fences at your home, you have a locked door at your house. And the reason why we don't leave our doors open is because how do you screen who walks in and out? How do you know who's coming in and out and when? And as the owner of the home, you have a right to know who's coming in. And so El Paso, many years ago, 70s up into the 80s, it was like the stolen vehicle capital of the nation. I know personally a gentleman that I knew in high school that he had 2 vehicles stolen at 2 separate times in El Paso, going down doing mission work for a church. And so at that time they had a problem with theft and different things that were happening. Well, once the border wall was put up in El Paso, a lot of that went down, and it went from a city that had a lot of encounters like that to, again, under the top 5 safest cities in the nation. And so by just securing that side of the border, helped them to regulate. So again, put it to today, we don't see wholesale crossing of people because you just physically can't do that in El Paso. There's a border fence that you're going to have to hit, and you'll have to walk miles and miles to the port of entry to be able to get inside that border fence. And so because of that reason, you don't see people crossing like that in El Paso. It's a different sector of things that are happening. More smuggling is happening in there. People are crossing in and smuggling people in different places, maybe coming in through New Mexico in places, and then coming over to the Texas side and trying to then get people onto the main interstates, Interstate 10 up there, and trying to get people transported then north into the country.
Wow, that's very interesting stuff. All right, well, when we come back, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Sergeant Couch will enlighten us what fentanyl, the drug fentanyl, and this penny have in common. Stick with us. You're watching Big Country Politics. Well, welcome back to Big Country Politics. I am Manny Diaz, once again joined by Sergeant Marc Couch of Texas DPS. He is our new public information officer here in Abilene in the Big Country. We're so excited to have you here.
We are so glad. I'm so glad. My family is so glad to be here. We have family in the area, and it's just a complete joy to be in the Abilene area.
Yeah. Well, Trooper Biddle did such a great job for us, and so we've already had a great working relationship. So we look to expand that as the years go on. So
you bet.
Nonetheless, before we left you in our first segment, we talked about the lethal fentanyl dosage. Well, we kind of mentioned a penny and what fentanyl, how that tied together. Sergeant Couch, you deal with, as a DPS trooper, you've seen a lot of narcotics over the years, I can imagine, and certainly being a member of law enforcement. You brought, we're seeing, these images here of a penny and just an amount of fentanyl. And I'll have you hold that up because I want you to show the viewer. Tell me, what is on this photo, on this image right here, and how does it relate to fentanyl and a penny and just what it all, tell us the story.
So we're just trying to give a graphic here basically of what a lethal dose of fentanyl would look like.
Yeah, hold that up.
So we're looking at here as a penny, and when you look at the ratio of penny, this is 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which represents about a lethal dose. That same fentanyl you see pictured here on the pencil head, that's how much fentanyl could fit on a pencil head, is one that could be a lethal dose for someone who gets a hold of that much fentanyl.
And that's what's crossing the border right now.
That's correct. So you're talking about, now when we talk about fentanyl, we're talking about kilos of fentanyl. We're talking about kilos of fentanyl. So you can imagine if that's what it takes to kill you, somewhere under that is the part we're looking at to get you high. How much money can you make with?
Oh my God!
With that much fentanyl. So a kilo of fentanyl could gross for you in a pill press $500,000.
What cocaine was to the 80s, early 90s, this is to our current era.
It is, and of course drug trends are drug trends that go up and down. The drug trade is if you can move as much as you can move in smaller quantities and get a bigger hit, or smaller quantities and you can get more money for it, tends to be the thing that goes on. We talked a little bit about legalizing marijuana, things of that nature. Yeah. So we talk about legalization of marijuana. We still see marijuana crossing the border. Even if you drove to Colorado and you can, go all these different places. I want to remind people it's illegal in Texas to have marijuana.
You hear that, folks? It's still illegal.
I want to make sure that people understand
yes.
that. If you come across law enforcement in Texas with with certain amounts of marijuana on you, you are going to go to jail. You are going to be prosecuted for marijuana because we stand fast to that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about bringing in, I mean, but what's amazing is a lot of people, the argument they use, will legalize it and we'll stop this business of the border. It'll become, all of a sudden we'll have this happy relationship with marijuana now. Well, how come we're still seizing tons of it coming across the border?
Yeah, it's a valid point.
So, you know, I don't think that really provides a good answer for tackling a drug problem as much as changing people's behavior.
Sure. Well, we see a lot of, you know, certainly a lot of, you know, congressmen, you see probably more to the right, you know, that talk about, you know, drug seizures at the border, certainly fentanyl seizure at the border. And how, you know, and you and I have had a conversation about this before, how, you know, your regular party drugs, so to speak, they're not party drugs anymore. Fentanyl is creeping into this thing, and you saw it. I mean, fentanyl here, folks, I mean, it's just this amount that can be incredibly lethal. Parents out there, what's your message to them, and certainly young folks that are watching this?
It ought to scare people to death, because the other thing that's happening with fentanyl is that it's not just, you know, like you can go out and say, I want to buy fentanyl and probably get it fentanyl that way, straight up. But the other side of this coin is that you have people who are manufacturing pills that look like other drugs, like Oxy, like Adderall, so when it comes across the border, it's going into a pill press, and they're labeling it, and it looks like just like the pill that you normally take, your Oxy or whatever, but it's actually being fueled by fentanyl. So there was a case, I was just looking at the news earlier, just doing some research about this segment before I came here. There was a guy on the internet he's in prison. He mixed a bad batch and overdosed 15 people, and 4 of those which died. In one setting, the EMS people said there were people dropping that evening like flies all over the city. And they were able to go back and they charged the dealer with murder. And he's in prison for that reason right now because of the bad batch that he mixed. So I want to remind people that fentanyl is a controlled substance. It is a legal, in other words, it's manufactured for medical purposes. Many people probably take it in the hospital. It's a pain reliever. When given, just like all drugs, when given in the right dosages and under the doctor's care and by a pharmacist who mixes it and has been trained to do all those things, it can be safe and it can be used that way for its intended purpose. When it begins to be abused and you're allowing somebody who has no degree or maybe didn't even graduate high school is mixing your drugs for you, and their manufacturer is selling you fentanyl, or you're thinking you're buying hydrocodone or Oxy in some way, and you're actually getting a pill that's been fueled by fentanyl. And so you're at that point, you know, did the guy do it right or wrong? And a lot of times, unfortunately, last year, you know, over 100, I think it was 107,000 people lost their lives to opiate overdoses, fentanyl being one of those, and probably leading the nation on killing people. And so I think we're already ahead of that trend this year. You're going to see probably way up over 100,000, probably, you know, 110, 115, 20,000 people probably dying of fentanyl this year. But that border that's being opened, that fentanyl is moving across because it's that kind of weight, it's that easy to sell, and there's a lot of money in it. And so for us to not have that border secure is, in a way, we're fighting a war. Fentanyl comes from China. China's going to take down this country if we're not careful, and there won't be a shot fired. It'll be from the inside out.
Valid point. Thank you so much for joining us in this segment of Big Country Politics. We welcome you to Abilene and the Big Country. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
That's great. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it very much. Hope to see the public and hope that we can provide information and safety information to the public through our news sources and our media partners all through Abilene, and just hope we have a great relationship.
Absolutely. Alrighty, for this edition of Big Country Politics, I am Manny Diaz, and this is Sergeant Marc Couch. We will see you next time.